For centuries, the Freemasons have fascinated the world. People speak of their rituals in hushed tones, imagine secret chambers lit by candlelight, and wonder whether this global fraternity truly holds hidden influence behind major moments in history. But beyond the myths, behind the veils of rumor and speculation, lies a story far more complex and far more human than the legends suggest. In today's video, we dive into the origins of Freemasonry, explore how their traditions evolved, and uncover why this group continues to spark curiosity across cultures. You will learn how symbolic ceremonies shaped their identity, why membership once signaled honor and intellectual pursuit, and how public misunderstanding turned a private brotherhood into a magnet for conspiracy theories. Our goal is not to chase sensational claims or dramatic tales. Instead, we explore documented history, cultural context, and real accounts that reveal who the Freemasons truly were and what they were not. This journey will take you from medieval stonemason guilds to Enlightenment-era societies, from architectural secrets to the powerful symbolism carved into their traditions. If you are interested in decoding mysteries, understanding hidden corners of history, or simply love stories that challenge what you think you know, then you are in the right place. Join us as we peel back layers of myth to uncover a story grounded not in fear, but in fascinating human tradition and historical evolution. Before we begin, if you enjoy content that blends history, storytelling, and fresh perspectives, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring more thought-provoking stories to life and reach others who share your curiosity. Let us dive. From the moment people first hear about Freemasonry, they imagine mystery rituals carried across centuries, symbols carved into stone, whispered stories about knowledge preserved from ancient times. Yet to understand how these ideas formed, we need to step back into a world long before modern speculation existed, to an era when Europe was shaped by builders whose hands lifted cathedrals toward the sky. These were the medieval stonemasons, craftsmen who traveled across kingdoms, carrying their skills, codes, and traditions wherever grand architecture demanded their touch. Their guilds functioned as both professional networks and protective communities, guarding the secrets of their trade at a time when knowledge was power and craftsmanship defined status. Within these guilds, symbols served a practical purpose long before they gained deeper philosophical meaning. Marks etched into stone identified a mason's work, ensured fair wages, and upheld standards recognized across regions. Over generations, those simple signs evolved into a system of shared identity, woven with moral lessons and coded teachings meant to reflect discipline, loyalty, and mastery. As the great cathedrals rose, so too did the symbolic language of the builders, shaping a culture where physical construction blended naturally with the idea of constructing oneself, one's character, oneness, integrity, one's understanding of the world. When later centuries brought intellectual change and the Enlightenment spread across Europe, these old guilds transformed. As the need for massive cathedrals lessened, and stonemasons themselves became fewer, their organizational structures shifted from operative craft to speculative thought. Membership moved away from literal builders to those who sought symbolic architecture, men who wished to build ideas, ethics, and personal growth rather than cathedral walls. It was this transition that gave Freemasonry its distinctive identity, where tools once used for carving stone became metaphors for shaping the moral life. At the center of this symbolic world stood a story drawn from ancient scripture. The Temple of Solomon. To the Freemasons, this temple was not merely a historical structure, but a model representing wisdom, order, and the pursuit of higher knowledge. Its imagery offered a narrative that linked medieval craftsmanship with sacred tradition, allowing members to frame their rituals around the idea of constructing an inner temple, a place where discipline, reflection, and ethical responsibility were built stone by stone. This connection to the Temple of Solomon also provided the fraternity with a powerful cultural anchor during times when symbolism could speak more safely and more clearly than open declarations. Across Europe, where political and religious tensions often ran high, coded messages and ritualized stories allowed members to communicate values without provoking conflict. The architecture of the temple, the tools of the mason, and the allegories of ancient builders merged into a shared language that carried meaning across borders and generations. As Freemasonry spread, its symbols appeared in meeting halls, manuscripts, and architectural designs that blended medieval heritage with philosophical ideals. The square, the compass, the pillar, and the arch each carried a lineage that stretched back to guild workshops. Biblical narratives, and the collective imagination of centuries. This network of ideas helped shape a worldview where knowledge was layered, where history served as a foundation, and where members saw themselves as part of a long continuum striving toward clarity and understanding. In this light, Freemasonry becomes less a secret society and more a cultural bridge linking practical craftsmanship with moral storytelling. Its rituals echo the rhythm of medieval guild life. Its symbols trace their lineage to builders who carved meaning into stone, and its architecture of ideas continues to invite curiosity. By the time the stories reached modern ears, the accumulated layers of history, myth, and interpretation had woven together into a tapestry that feels both mysterious and deeply human, a reflection of how people across ages have searched for belonging, purpose, and a narrative that connects their lives to something enduring. As Freemasonry evolved from the guild halls of medieval builders into a symbolic fraternity shaped by ritual, philosophy, and a shared language of architecture and scripture, its appeal began reaching far beyond craftsmen. What started as a circle of skilled masons slowly transformed into a meeting ground for thinkers, artists, and leaders who sensed in its traditions something both ancient and adaptable, a place where symbolism could spark reflection, where allegory could inspire ambition, and where the idea of building one's inner character resonated with the intellectual spirit of their age. It was in this shifting landscape that some of history's most influential figures found themselves drawn toward the lodge, seeking not power or secrecy, but a space where ideas could be exchanged freely in a world often divided by status, politics, or national borders. When Mozart stepped into a Masonic lodge in Vienna, he brought with him the brilliance of a composer whose mind thrived on structure and harmony. The rituals, steeped in symbolic architecture, mirrored the disciplined creativity that shaped his music, and echoes of Masonic themes would later weave themselves into his compositions, not as coded messages but as reflections of the philosophical atmosphere he encountered. Goethe, too, saw Freemasonry as an intellectual refuge, a place where allegory and dramatic symbolism aligned naturally with his literary imagination. For writers like him, the fraternity's rituals offered a narrative framework rich with metaphor, allowing him to explore human nature through stories that connected earthly experience with ideals of self-improvement and moral clarity. Across the ocean, the lodge doors opened to men who would shape nations. George Washington, navigating the uncertainties of revolution and leadership, found in Freemasonry a community that emphasized integrity, reason, and shared responsibility. In an era marked by conflict and the forging of new political identities, the fraternity's principles provided a stabilizing foundation, a reminder that leadership was not merely authority but also stewardship. His involvement later inspired countless interpretations. Yet within the historical record, his membership reads less like participation in a secretive order and more like engagement in one of the few organized spaces where civility and philosophical exchange were not overshadowed by the pressures of governance. Winston Churchill, navigating the storms of war centuries later, encountered Freemasonry in a different context but with similar motivations. The lodge offered respite from political turmoil, a room where hierarchy softened and conversation could move beyond strategy toward reflection. The fraternity did not shape his policies, but it reflected his lifelong search for camaraderie grounded in shared ideals rather than social position alone. In these gatherings, he joined others seeking connection across divides, bound not by rank but by a commitment to learning and personal discipline. Even in the realm of creativity and entertainment, names like Walt Disney reveal a different facet of the fraternity's appeal. For him, the blend of tradition, symbolism, and narrative structure aligned naturally with his instinct for world building. The lodge was not a source of secret stories hidden within his creations, but instead another environment where imagination, discipline, and community intertwined. It resonated with the same impulses that drove him to craft stories filled with moral lessons, fantastical worlds, and characters striving toward growth. These figures, diverse in background and ambition, shared a common attraction to the fraternity's quiet promise, a space where centuries of symbolic heritage could inspire thoughtful engagement with the world. Their membership added prestige to the organization, but it also highlighted a deeper truth. Freemasonry endured not because it sought influence, but because it offered something many of these individuals craved: a sense of continuity with the past, a circle of peers who valued reflection, and a symbolic tradition that encouraged them to shape their inner lives as carefully as the great builders shaped stone. Through their presence, the fraternity became woven into broader historical narratives, not as a hidden force, but as a gathering point where some of the most curious minds of each era sought meaning, structure, and a shared story to guide their pursuit of understanding. As Freemasonry moved through centuries of transformation, gathering thinkers, creators, and leaders who sought meaning within its symbolic architecture, it became inevitable that people began searching for older roots capable of explaining its enduring mystique. Among the stories that emerged, none captured the imagination quite like the supposed connection between the Freemasons and the Knights Templar. This legend, passed down through whispers, manuscripts, and romanticized histories, suggested that behind the calm order of the lodge lay echoes of a vanished military brotherhood, whose dramatic rise and fall had shaped medieval Europe. Whether fact or fiction, the idea carried a compelling narrative power that blended seamlessly with the fraternity's already rich tapestry of symbols and traditions. The Knights Templar had long been a subject of fascination, formed during the Crusades as protectors of pilgrims and custodians of sacred sites. They became renowned for discipline, wealth, and architectural brilliance. Their fortresses, marked by geometric precision and mathematical harmony, reflected the same respect for structure that would later define Masonic symbolism. When political tides turned and the order met its tragic dissolution, the sudden disappearance of their vast network created fertile ground for myths of hidden archives, concealed treasures, and surviving members who carried their knowledge into secret circles. These stories, though rarely supported by direct evidence, resonated with the public imagination because they filled the silence left by a powerful order that had vanished almost overnight. As Freemasonry expanded during the Enlightenment, the parallels between the two groups, real or imagined, became irresistible. Both valued ritual, discipline, and moral narrative. Both drew upon symbols that blended practicality with higher meaning, and both cultivated a sense of brotherhood that transcended social divisions. Over time, these thematic similarities encouraged speculation that the fraternity had inherited not just architectural metaphors from medieval builders, but also spiritual or philosophical legacies from the Templars themselves. The square and compass, the pillars, the emphasis on sacred geometry, and even allegorical references to ancient temples fueled comparisons, intertwining two distinct histories into a single sweeping legend. Writers and early Masonic historians helped amplify this connection, some out of genuine belief, others out of a desire to enrich the fraternity's origin story with a lineage that felt heroic and dramatic. The idea that Templar Knights had quietly survived through coded traditions and preserved their ideals within Masonic lodges offered a narrative of resilience and continuity that appealed to members seeking a deeper sense of heritage. It created an imaginative bridge between the physical courage of medieval warriors and the philosophical courage of Enlightenment thinkers who championed reason, ethics, and personal growth. Documentaries exploring this relationship often journey through ancient fortresses, cathedral vaults, and crumbling manuscripts in search of links that blend history with myth. They trace architectural motifs that appear in both Templar sites and Masonic halls, examine rituals that share symbolic gestures, and follow legends of hidden treasures allegedly moved across continents under the protection of surviving brothers. While many of these connections remain speculative, they illuminate how cultural memory transforms over centuries, layering metaphor upon fact and symbolism upon history. Within the broader story of Freemasonry, the Templar legend becomes more than a question of ancestry. It reflects a human impulse to anchor meaning in the past, to weave personal identity into narratives that stretch beyond individual lifetimes. The fraternity's own rituals, shaped by medieval craftsmanship and Enlightenment philosophy, provided fertile ground for these stories to take root. Even without definitive proof, the legend persisted because it spoke to themes already central to Masonic tradition: the pursuit of knowledge, the preservation of ideals, and the belief that moral architecture is built through continuity. In this way, the legendary links between the Freemasons and the Knights Templar form a chapter not of secret succession, but of shared storytelling, a merging of historical memory and symbolic imagination that enriches the journey already shaped by medieval guilds, intellectual minds, and centuries of evolving tradition. The story of the Knights Templar, which has long hovered like a shadow at the edge of Masonic legend, becomes even more compelling when one traces the dramatic arc of their rise and fall. After their founding during the Crusades, the Templars quickly grew into one of the most formidable institutions of medieval Europe. They were warriors, yes, but they were also administrators, architects, and financiers who established a network of fortresses, managed extensive landholdings, and created early systems that resembled modern banking. Their discipline and efficiency earned them trust from rulers and nobles across continents, allowing them to accumulate influence that stretched far beyond the battlefield. Yet the very qualities that brought them prominence eventually placed them in the crosshairs of those who envied, feared, or sought to control their power. By the beginning of the 14th century, France stood at the center of shifting political pressure, and King Philip, burdened by debt and determined to strengthen his authority, turned his eyes toward the Templars with a mixture of suspicion and opportunity. Their wealth, independence, and loyalty to the papacy made them both valuable and vulnerable. Historians have long noted how tensions between monarchs and religious institutions created an environment where accusations could easily be shaped to serve political needs. Philip, confronting financial strain and eager for resources he could not openly seize, found in the Templars a target whose prestige made the downfall both dramatic and profitable. Under the cover of secrecy, he orchestrated a coordinated effort to dismantle the order. Arrest warrants were prepared with precision, timed to strike across France in a single sweeping action. What followed was a narrative that still reverberates through history. Members of a respected brotherhood suddenly confronted with charges that read more like political fiction than genuine investigation. As the Templars were taken into custody, accusations emerged that painted them as practitioners of forbidden rites, a portrayal designed not only to justify their imprisonment but also to sever the public trust they had built over generations. Interrogations unfolded under circumstances that left little room for fairness. Confessions extracted under extreme pressure provided Philip with the justification he needed, even as their reliability remained doubtful. The papacy, caught between asserting authority and navigating political realities, struggled to counter the momentum that the French crown had set in motion. What began as a targeted attack quickly expanded into a systematic dismantling of the order, with trials held across Europe and members forced to defend themselves against claims that lacked consistent evidence. The climax of this tragedy came when leading figures within the order faced execution. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, met his fate with a composure that later generations would interpret as a final testament to the Templars' integrity. His death signaled not only the end of an era, but also the beginning of centuries of speculation about what had been lost, hidden, or carried into secrecy before the order collapsed. This vacuum of certainty allowed legends to flourish, stories of treasures spirited away, archives concealed, and knowledge preserved by survivors who supposedly blended into other brotherhoods. Within the broader context of Freemasonry, these events provided fertile ground for future myth-making. The fraternity's appreciation for symbolism and historical narrative made the Templar tragedy an irresistible chapter to contemplate, even without direct evidence linking the two groups. The destruction of a powerful yet principled order, undone by political ambition and strategic accusations, created a story that felt thematically aligned with the values Freemasons sought to uphold: resilience, moral strength, and continuity amidst adversity. As the centuries passed, the fall of the Templars became a legend woven into the cultural imagination, not as a foundation for Freemasonry, but as a parallel story that enriched the symbolic universe surrounding it. In the wake of the Templars' dramatic collapse, as the order fractured under political pressure and accusations crafted to justify its destruction, Europe became fertile ground for speculation about what happened to those who escaped the sweeping arrests. The disappearance of an institution so vast, so organized, and so deeply rooted in multiple kingdoms created a silence that invited imagination to fill the gaps. Among the most enduring ideas was the belief that a number of Templar knights fled northward, seeking refuge in lands beyond the immediate reach of the French crown. Scotland, with its rugged terrain, shifting alliances, and partial distance from papal politics, emerged as the most compelling setting for these stories, a place where history and legend began to intertwine. The notion of Templars arriving on Scottish shores is supported not by definitive proof, but by a mosaic of archaeological hints, regional tales, and architectural anomalies that seem to whisper of influences arriving from distant lands. Scattered carvings, unusual motifs embedded in stonework, and sudden stylistic shifts in certain chapels have prompted generations of researchers to wonder whether skilled builders and displaced knights found sanctuary there. The timing, too, aligns with a period when Scotland faced its own political turbulence, creating circumstances in which the arrival of disciplined, resourceful outsiders would not have been impossible. Over time, these possibilities became part of local memory. Villagers passed down stories of mysterious warriors appearing in remote regions, of knowledge shared quietly with local stonemasons, of rituals that seemed foreign yet purposeful. Some tales describe these visitors integrating into the fabric of Scottish society, offering their expertise in construction, administration, or symbolic storytelling. Though the historical record remains cautious, these recurring narratives suggest a cultural imprint that, whether literal or metaphorical, resonated strongly enough to endure across generations. One of the most frequently cited pieces of this puzzle lies in certain architectural sites that seem to reflect styles or symbolic elements associated with the Templars. Chapels adorned with intricate carvings, geometric patterns reminiscent of sacred designs from the Middle East, and iconography that appears slightly out of place for the region have led some scholars to propose that craftsmen with unusual backgrounds had a hand in their creation. The Rosslyn Chapel, often discussed in this context, embodies this mystery. While interpretations vary widely, the chapel's elaborate stonework, rich with symbolism that spans continents and eras, has fueled speculation that its builders drew upon knowledge carried by wandering knights or masons whose traditions blended European and Eastern influences. These whispers of Templar presence did more than enrich local folklore. They shaped the evolution of later societies that found meaning in symbolism, discipline, and continuity. In Scotland, where medieval guild traditions remained strong, the idea of inheriting wisdom from displaced knights became part of a broader narrative embraced by groups that valued ritual and historical depth. Whether through direct contact or the natural merging of parallel traditions, the legends of Templars in Scotland influenced the way certain brotherhoods framed their identity, drawing upon themes of survival, moral conviction, and the preservation of knowledge. This fusion of local heritage and imported myth created an environment where emerging societies could anchor themselves in stories that felt both ancient and aspirational. Over generations, these tales became woven into the cultural imagination, not because they offered concrete answers, but because they echoed the universal desire to believe that ideals once threatened by power and politics could find refuge and renewed purpose in the unfolding narrative of Freemasonry and its symbolic predecessors. Scotland as legends serve as a bridge between the collapse of a medieval order and the rise of modern fraternities that continue to draw inspiration from the architectural, philosophical, and moral traditions shaped by centuries of storytelling. By the time stories of wandering Templars and the lingering echoes of their architecture had settled into European imagination, another transformation was already unfolding, one that would reshape Freemasonry into a force far larger than the medieval guilds from which it emerged. Those early builders had long relied on craft, discipline, and shared symbols to protect the integrity of their work. But as cathedral construction waned and the intellectual energy of the Enlightenment swept across Europe, the fraternity began to shift in ways no stonemason of earlier centuries could have predicted. In taverns, private halls, and rented chambers across cities like London, Edinburgh, and Vienna, Freemasonry evolved from a network of skilled artisans into a place where ideas mattered as much as craftsmanship. The rituals that once celebrated physical construction now took on metaphorical meaning, teaching lessons about moral development, personal responsibility, and the pursuit of knowledge. Tools such as the square and compass, once strictly practical, became symbols guiding members to reflect on fairness, discipline, and balance in their lives. This shift did not erase the past, it reframed it, turning centuries of builder tradition into the foundation for a new kind of intellectual fellowship. As the 18th century unfolded, Europe found itself in an era marked by scientific curiosity, political experimentation, and a growing desire for spaces where people from different backgrounds could meet without the rigid boundaries imposed by class or institution. Freemasonry offered exactly that. Its lodges provided an environment where nobility could sit beside merchants, artists could speak alongside statesmen, and scholars could exchange ideas with military officers, all bound by shared ritual rather than social rank. This fluidity made the fraternity a rare institution in a world still shaped by hierarchy, and its emphasis on reason, dialogue, and ethical living aligned perfectly with Enlightenment ideals. It was during this period that men of influence began to enter the lodges in larger numbers, not because they sought clandestine advantage, but because the fraternity offered something their positions often denied them: a space for reflection unburdened by court politics, and a circle of peers who valued thought, learning, and moral discourse. Thinkers found in its rituals a structure that complemented their search for intellectual clarity. Statesmen saw in its emphasis on integrity and measured behavior a framework that resonated with their responsibilities. Artists recognized the narrative power of its symbolism, which echoed themes of transformation and personal growth. As membership diversified, the fraternity developed a cultural presence that extended far beyond its meeting rooms. Lodges became places where philosophical debates intersected with scientific inquiry, where discussions about architecture coexisted with conversations about governance, and where individuals tested ideas that later shaped public life. In some regions, Masonic networks played quiet roles in promoting education, supporting charitable efforts, or encouraging civic engagement, not through coordinated agendas, but through the influence of members who carried their values into their daily work. This evolution did not erase the mystery that continued to surround the fraternity. Instead, it deepened it. Outsiders, watching nobles and intellectuals gather behind closed doors, often misinterpreted the privacy of lodge rituals as evidence of secret power. Yet the secrecy protected tradition rather than ambition, preserving the symbolic language inherited from medieval guilds and enriched by centuries of storytelling. The combination of elite membership, elaborate ceremonies, and a growing presence in cultural life created an image that was both admired and misunderstood, fueling narratives that would follow Freemasonry into modern times. By the end of the 18th century, the fraternity stood transformed, a society rooted in ancient craftsmanship, yet shaped by the intellectual currents of its age. A place where people sought not privilege but perspective, and where symbols carved by long-forgotten masons became guides for personal and philosophical exploration. This new identity allowed Freemasonry to move confidently into the centuries ahead, carrying with it the echoes of builders, thinkers, and legends that had shaped its remarkable journey. As Freemasonry crossed the Atlantic and established itself in the emerging United States, its symbols and values blended naturally into a society still shaping its identity. The early republic was built by individuals who admired reason, order, and civic responsibility, principles long embedded in Masonic tradition. It was no surprise that some of the nation's founders and early presidents found meaning in the fraternity's rituals, or that the new country's architecture carried echoes of the symbolic language that had guided Masons for centuries. Columns, geometric layouts, references to classical ideals, and carefully constructed public spaces reflected a worldview that valued structure not only in buildings, but also in the moral fabric of a nation seeking stability. As cities rose and institutions took shape, Masonic imagery found its way into meeting halls, monuments, foundational documents, and even ceremonial practices. To many observers, these elements became evidence of hidden influence, fueling debates that would persist for generations. Political gatherings involving members of the fraternity, presidential participation in cornerstone ceremonies, and recurring architectural themes all contributed to an impression that Freemasonry occupied a special place within the country's development. Some interpreted these patterns as deliberate signals of power, while others saw them simply as cultural continuity and extension of the fraternity's long-standing appreciation for symbolism, rather than a coordinated attempt to shape national policy. Historians continue to examine this intersection between public life and private tradition. While there is no consensus on how deeply Masonic ideas influenced government decisions, most agree that the fraternity served more as a social and intellectual meeting point than a political engine. Its emphasis on personal growth, ethical conduct, and community service appealed to leaders navigating a young nation filled with uncertainty. But these values did not translate into a unified political agenda. Instead, the presence of Masonic elements in American history reflects a broader truth, that people often carry the traditions that shaped them into the public sphere, leaving subtle traces of their personal philosophy woven into the broader cultural landscape. In this way, the story of Freemasonry in the United States becomes the natural final chapter of a much longer journey. From medieval builders crafting cathedrals, to Enlightenment thinkers seeking intellectual community, to legends of displaced knights leaving echoes across Europe, the fraternity evolved with every era it touched. Its symbols traveled through continents and centuries, shifting in meaning but never losing their fascination. And even today, these symbols invite curiosity not because they promise hidden power, but because they remind us of humanity's enduring search for purpose, structure, and connection. Thank you for joining this exploration into a world where history and myth intertwine, where architecture becomes metaphor, and where centuries of tradition continue to spark wonder. If you enjoy stories that illuminate the past and challenge the imagination, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay connected for more journeys into the mysteries that shape our world.